all good? Folks, thanks for coming. Everyone's here on time.
That's food, Bill.
Mr. John Lewis is prepared to give us a welcome from the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming again. This is our second Community Advisory Committee meeting for this. Dana, who's managing this project, is also managing the technology, so I told her I would make some introductions and announcements, and just let you know that the bathrooms are just out this door and around to your left, so if you need the bathroom, that's the best option. There's probably other options, but that's by far the best option. So we've got a pretty full agenda. I thought do we have time for a round of introductions?
Yes,
okay,
some special guests, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we do have special guests in the room, so thank them. We want to thank them for that. So I'll just maybe mention that since it came up. So at the last Community Advisory Committee meeting, the consensus from the group was we really needed some key stakeholders in the room. So John Mackler from Oregon Department of Transportation offered, and John can better introduce himself, but I know he's leads the planning group in Region 1, and so can speak to kind of some of their offerings or constraints, right? So, and then Mike Besner is Clackamas County. You're not you oversee the transportation department.
Assistant Director of Transportation, among other things.
Right. So he knows, Mike and I work together a lot on a variety of things, but mostly road related. If I lose my dog, your department will go get my dog for me, won't they?
Yes.
So he's
I'm
got
the dog catcher.
he's got a diverse set of things that he oversees. So maybe we can start with that. Anyone quickly go through, Dana, and we'll just come around and go from there.
Sure. Dana Webb is the City of Oregon City Project Manager for the Alternate Mobility Project.
Kelly Reed, I'm a planner with Oregon City.
Christine Connolly with Kettleson and Associates.
And Community Advisory Committee members, please go ahead and, since we're still learning who each other are, go ahead and state your name and just a little bit about your name, rank, serial number, but your, the perspective, the hats that you're wearing this evening, please.
Goodrich, City of Oregon City Public Works City Engineer.
Bob Mahoney, a citizen at large.
Henry McEnroth, representative from the Transportation Advisory Committee and ex-city engineer for Oregon City.
Renata Mengelberg on the Oregon City Commission.
Mike Mitchell, I'm the Citizen Involvement Committee representative, and I also live about 3 blocks away from the intersection. I got a personal stake in it too.
Bill Avison with Avison Lumber. I'm kind of representing Malala because we have an interest in obviously what happens in 213. I actually want to thank Mike and John for being here because, again, I think it's a bigger issue than just the city of Oregon City. And thank you.
Don't you also sit on an ACT?
Pardon me?
Don't you also sit on...
Oh, yes, I also sit on ACT ODOT Region 1 along with Bill. Right.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm Rick Gibbons. I'm a planning consultant. I live in Oregon City, and I work with a lot of developers and landowners.
John stole my thunder. I'm John Mackler. I manage the planning crew for ODOT here in Region 1. We do the long-range TSP type of planning, and we also do the short-range development review planning work as well.
Michelle Dawn. I work and live in Oregon City, and I'm representing the Oregon City Chamber of Commerce.
Nathan McCarty. I'm representing the Oregon City Development Stakeholders Group, and also on the side of the Clackamas County Traffic Safety Commission, and do work on a lot of development projects, engineering development projects in Oregon City.
I'm Luke Norman. I'm with Clackamas Community College, and I work to make it safer and easier for students to get to campus.
David Mabey, I'm with the Oregon City Planning Commission.
Bill Merchant. I'm representing the Hamlet of Beaver Creek, and Beaver Creek, the Hamlet of Beaver Creek goes all the way down Beaver Creek Road, south of Oregon City. I also, as Bill mentioned, I am on the Region 1 Area Council on Transportation.
I'm Christina Browning. I'm a realtor, a resident that lives only a few blocks from the intersection. I'm also the vice chair for the Caulfield Association.
I'm John Recklander. I'm a traffic engineer, independent consultant who works for Oregon City, both planning and public works departments.
I'm Susie Wright with Kittleson and Associates, and I'm managing the consultant work for this project in support of the city.
Laura.
My name is Laura Turbo. I'm the Community Development Director, so planning and building departments here at the city. We keep the city safe and, yeah, a great place to be.
So I mentioned my name is John Lewis, Public Works Director. We've got everything mic'd up. This is a pretty big deal. This is about as tight as we get, and it's kind of hard to do in a circular fashion around here. That's why we're cramped in like this. There's a few people that are still missing. I'm hoping they show. So if they do, we may need some of those blank spots to squeeze them in. So keep that
I think
in mind.
for the AV folks, we should all try and speak into our microphones. Is that right? So that folks who are listening, streaming, rebroadcast can hear what we're saying. Thank you. Susie, so, I mean,
Mike,
I didn't
can we
do
get
that.
Mike?
Oh,
Mike.
pardon me.
He introduced me already.
So sorry.
Did a good job.
Mike Besner. Kirsten Green. So Kogan Owens Green have the pleasure of helping just facilitate this group for Susie and the consulting team. It's a pleasure to be back in Oregon City. A great respect for your community and your initiatives. So thanks. Susie?
All right, well, I'm going to give a little quick recap of our meeting last time, and we'll talk about the purpose of this meeting and our upcoming meetings, and then we'll dive into an overview of some of this material. We had a great meeting with the Technical Advisory Committee group yesterday, so we'll be talking a bit about what their perspectives were and seeing if they resonate with you and if you're kind of in alignment with the Technical Advisory Committee. And then we'll talk about steps, but we're going to have about an hour of our agenda, we're hoping tonight, for discussion. Much like we did last time, with a kind of a series of questions to get your kind of pulse and thoughts on the material that we're presenting tonight. So just a little bit of background. I know we went through this at the last meeting, but really what this project is about is an outcome from the city's TSP update that got finalized last year. And in that TSP update, the TSP essentially identified that there wasn't a viable solution for the 213 and Beaver Creek Road intersection. There had previously been an interchange at the intersection within the plan, and through the process that was removed from the transportation system plan because there was regional agreement that it was not a financially feasible project. But what was left in the TSP was this identification that we needed to look to develop an alternative way to measure performance for the intersection in the future and see what other options we might be able to do that might not meet the performance standards that's currently adopted, but that can help provide some increased safety and some relief to congestion. So that was really our charge for the project. We talked a little bit about what were the existing and future conditions that are forecast at the intersection. We talked about safety and some of the environmental and physical constraints that face the intersection. We then did a little bit of quite an exercise re-looking at potential big improvements for the intersection to make sure that there was nothing that was being overlooked. And we came up with, depending on how many sub-alternatives of the interchange, we came up with about 7 alternatives. 4 were kind of on-the-ground improvements but would have an impact on the footprint of the intersection and how large it is. And we revisited several of the interchange alternatives. And what came out of that meeting was we heard both from you and the Technical Advisory Committee that there were 2 at-grade alternatives that we thought were worth some additional discussions and additional look into their long-term feasibility and more refinement to determine if they would in fact be financially feasible. And this group, different from the Technical Advisory Group, also requested that the notion, looking really long-term, looking past 20 years, that the idea for an interchange not be completely removed from consideration. And there was a request to make sure that we were coordinating with our regional partners at this intersection. So that's why we have John and Mike here tonight. But ODOT and the county have been represented all along on our technical advisory committee. So just a quick recap on the policy context, as I said. We know that this solution isn't, or this intersection isn't just Oregon City's problem, and it's not created just by Oregon City residents and businesses, but there was agreement that we need a regional financial support to support some sort of long-term major improvement that's just not in the cards right now in the near term. But the city has an obligation to the state and their transportation system plan to develop an alternative mobility target to give us a framework to work from in the near term, and which in essence means accepting some higher levels of congestion so that the city can continue planning for a solution and allow implementation of the concept plans. So the goal of our last meeting was really to make sure that you understood the purpose and the background of the project, and discuss some of those bigger, larger fixes for the intersection and see if there was anything worth continuing to investigate. Our purpose of our meeting tonight is to help you understand our options that are out there for different ways to measure performance at the intersection and look at safety. Our final meeting, although we kind of have reserved that it's possible we might need a fourth meeting, but tentatively, our third and final meeting will be to bring these two things together, kind of come forward with what is the final package of the recommended alternative mobility target, identifying which improvements are financially feasible to go along with that, and then potentially are there unfinancially constrained projects that we want to leave the door open for in the future. Is there any kind of questions about kind of that background summary of the kind of project context, where we've been and where we're going, before I kind of start diving into our goals for the meeting tonight?
So that's Susie's warning that she's going to give a long presentation here coming up. So if you have any questions or comments about where we are, the agenda tonight, what our goals for this meeting are, the purpose of the project, please let us know. And in general, just a friendly reminder that so I can kind of track who is queuing up to share their perspectives with the committee and staff. If you wouldn't mind just raising your card if you have a burning or contribution to make, we want to hear from you. So anything right here off the bat, everything clear? Everyone knows they're in the right meeting and we're ready for Susie's presentation? Okay. All right, thanks.
All right, well, my next several slides are all going to be kind of working from the information in the memo that's presented in Table 4. And we recognize that this is highly technical information, and but we want to try to bring you along a little bit so you can have some sense of the things that we're considering, that the city's considering, and that we've been soliciting feedback from the Technical Advisory Committee. So although your packet didn't have many recommendations in it, it was very straightforward information. Since the memo was published, we've had discussions with the city and discussions with our Technical Advisory Committee. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is be letting you know what what's coming forward out of the Technical Advisory Group, what their recommendations are, so that can help you understand where we think this is going. But we're here tonight to see if where we think we're going makes sense, and if you have questions about it, or if you have any concerns and comments about it, and if you think we are headed in the right direction. So the next couple slides, as I said, are going to follow the Table 4 and kind of stepping through what are some of the different performance measures that we can look at. So what is an alternative mobility target? Well, mobility target is the target that we are setting is set forth in the Oregon Highway Plan for how we want to try to plan for an intersection to function. But that target is really based around a performance measure. So kind of switching language here from mobility target to performance measure. We have options, different ways to measure performance, and that's what we're going to step through. Some of the different performance measures that can be used to measure mobility. So the first measure, which is what the city's, the measure that ODOT currently uses for their highways, and the city currently has it in their TSP to look at ODOT highways with this measure, which is the volume to capacity ratio. And this is a measure of how many people want to go through an intersection in a given hour versus how many people physically can get through an intersection in a given hour. So at 1.0, it's operating at maximum capacity, and if it's at 0.99, it's operating at 99% of capacity. So the current target is that a volume to capacity ratio of 0.99 in the peak hour of the day. We know that today it's operating at about 0.97 during the peak hour of the day, which is pretty darn close to max capacity. And the forecast in the TSP is for it to operate at 1.05, so 5% over kind of that maximum capacity. Which is kind of the issue we're trying to address. So some of the technical advisory group's thoughts on this measure, it's very easily applied by the city, by ODOT, by property owners and developers. There's a reason that this measure is broadly used, and it really has to do with it's very easy to measure, quantify, document impacts, and also document ways to improve it. And it's the established method of predicting and analyzing intersection operations of this type. So basically still a lot of comfort in volume to capacity as a performance measure as far as its kind of ease of use. There are several measures that were looked at associated that instead of, this ratio of volume to capacity, but measures that are really more based on delay. How long does it take to get through the intersection? Or better said, how long am I sitting there at the intersection delayed? And there's a couple different measures, but that all come down to delay. Intersection delay, you've probably heard, maybe many of you have heard of intersection level of service, which is a measure of delay, but it's converted to an A through F scale with different ranges corresponding to each letter. And then there's something called critical movement delay, which is where you're still paying attention to delay, but only for certain movements instead of the whole intersection. So when it came down to discussing these measures related to delay, the technical advisory group all concurred that these also are measures that are very easy for the city and for property owners and developers to apply. And that the city uses this measure on their city streets. It just is not ODOT's current metric. But there weren't really necessarily any strong preferences between the volume capacity ratio measures, which are currently used on ODOT highways, and the delay-based measures. We also looked at some more kind of measures that are a little bit more cutting edge that are starting to be used in long-range planning. They're not widely used for doing things like looking at development applications, for example, or specific property zone changes. But they are being used, as I said, in the long-range planning arenas. And those are looking at travel time. So what is the travel time to get from point A to point B along a corridor? But there's some difficulty in application of this measure. It requires a lot of data, which I'm going to talk to you about some data that we collected for this project to get some baseline information to help inform this discussion. But to use it as a measure long term would require kind of continuous recollection of data that's fairly expensive. And it's a very difficult measure to apply on a small scale, trying to look at measuring incremental impacts associated with development and zone changes. And similar along those lines, there's another measure related to travel time called travel time reliability, which says, okay, the trip might take me 2 minutes on a regular basis, but sometimes it takes me 5 minutes. And so how reliable is my trip? Because if I want to be on time all the time, I have to always plan that it's going to take me 5 minutes, or I'm going to be late sometimes. So travel time reliability kind of has to do with that. How much time are you buffering and adding to your trip to ensure that you're on time to account for the reliability of traffic at that intersection? So again, very similar comments from the technical advisory group on this measure about the kind of cost of the data and the model to do this evaluation not being readily available to everybody and difficult to apply at the small scale. Some other measures that were looked at: average speed. So how long does it take to travel through or what's the average speed at which you can go through the intersection? How many hours a day? Is there congestion at the intersection? Hours, they'll call that hours of congestion. And again, both of those two measures had similar challenges to the travel time data, travel time measures. And then we also talked about intersection completeness, which is a measure that people were supporting, just simply measuring, is this intersection complete when it comes to complete facilities for, all the envisioned turn lanes there, the pedestrian push buttons, the bike lanes, like what could we do to make the intersection more complete for all modes? It was basically, this is a good measure and maybe something to look at in planning. What are the improvements that we want to make sure do get included with the lower cost improvements for this intersection to make sure that it's complete, but it's not a measure to apply to measuring impact of a development. So a lot of these measures have some related themes of travel time, how long does it take me to get through the intersection? How long am I delayed to get through the intersection? How many hours a day am I experiencing congestion? And so to provide a baseline for this discussion, we did some data collection. We put some what are called BlueMac data readers out at the intersection, one on all four legs of the intersection, where we were able to pick up anonymously, but the Bluetooth signals that come out of your car and your cell phone. And we collected data for a week. And what that allowed us to do is see over the course of a week, 24 hours a day, how long was it taking people to travel through the intersection. And because there were 4 readers, we could measure it specifically. How long did it take people to make the right turn versus the through movement versus the right turn movement. So we got a lot of really interesting data about how long it's taking people to travel through this intersection and how long they're delayed. Yes? Yes?
I saw the memorandum that this data was collected in January.
Yes.
But this January, we lost a week of school, and a lot of people didn't go to work because it was icy or snowy or whatever.
Yes.
So how reliable was this? How average is this data?
Yeah.
Because that was a problem we had in January when the data was collected.
Yeah. It was the very last week of January. It was not one of our snow event weeks. Excuse me. Yes, Henry.
I actually have a couple, 3 more questions than anything else, but I'm suddenly thinking we haven't defined mobility, and I'm wondering what exactly we're trying to talk about with mobility. And also, because we're on the edge of metro, I'm also concerned about what is regional. In terms of this intersection, regional goes to Molalla, it goes to Estacada, it goes to Silverton.
Yep.
How much of that type of information is included in this? Is there a possibility to do some sort of a destination survey for people outside of that area to see how many of the Molalla residents use this intersection?
Yeah, I think some of those kind of questions about, so we know it's an intersection that has a significant amount of regional traffic, and you can see that in the traffic volumes just by the sheer number of volumes that are going northbound and southbound through compared to making all the turning movements. Significant portion of all those through movements, plus many of the turning movements we know are regional movements. We did not collect origin destination kind of from a longer perspective. We can get some estimates out of that from the Metro model. But I think those questions aren't going to impact what we want to start using to define mobility, but I think they are really relevant when it starts coming down to how do we fund the project and I think it speaks to I think what we have agreed on in the last meeting is that it's a regional issue. It's going to require a regional solution for funding. So, but I don't think it impacts how we decide that we want to measure mobility. So that was your other question, is how do we define mobility, or what is mobility? And that's part of what we're trying to define through this process is, so the traditional mobility measure has been volume to capacity ratio, and it's a measure that's strictly focused on vehicle mobility. But we know that we want to think about the ability for people to move through the intersection walking and biking, and thinking about transit vehicles' ability to get through the intersection. But that's what we're hoping to do with this process, is decide what measure are we going to use to define mobility for the intersection for vehicles is what we're talking about through this process, is how do we want to define mobility for vehicles.
Great, we have Commissioner and then Bill again.
So, you said you use BlueMac readers to go by. So, if I have an older car and a flip phone, I was invisible to you.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, what's the accuracy to data ratio?
Yeah.
Because Oregon City, especially up in that area, has got a lot of older vehicles.
Yeah.
And
Our rate was about 11%. When you compared the traffic volumes at the intersection to how many data points we were picking up, it was about 11%, which is probably better than you could get through any other type of data collection method where you were trying to look at license plates or measure how long it was taking people to get through the intersection. So it's a pretty high percentage. And so we're not using this data. We're trying to see what's going on. We're not trying to set anything today by a specific number, but we wanted to see what are the trends that are happening there, and can we relate to them? Does this data match what we're thinking is going on at the intersection? So let me explain it a little bit. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just one more question on the study. It says then the footnote that the northbound data collection point was further away, twice as far as the other points. Why?
Because there was no pole within that same distance to mount it on, basically for the 213 north leg heading towards 205.
So it was just a physical constraint about where you could put the measuring device. Okay.
Yep. So it could impact the time that we found, but generally that time is the time that people are actually moving when you're between 1,000 and 2,000 feet away. And we felt we were still getting a good representation of the change throughout the day of how long it's taking you. So that's really what we wanted to try to measure, is how long is it taking people to get through the intersection, not so much from a specific, am I off by, 10 or 20 seconds, but am I seeing a lot of variability throughout the day? What is the variability, I think, was the main thing that we wanted to see. And then see, do we see any trends of, on the times where it takes a long time comparatively to other hours, how long is that occurring? So we have two lines here. The blue is average, and I'll start by talking about that, but let me first talk about what's shown. At the bottom of the chart, this is the time of day. So this is 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m. So right here, this point and this point, this is the 7 o'clock hour in the morning. And this is 5 p.m., so this is the 5 o'clock hour at night. So this starts to trail off into the evening, and this is our 2, 3, 4, and 5 o'clock afternoon. What's occurring on this axis is the travel time. So that's how many seconds from the time somebody approached the intersection 1,000 feet away, and then when did they get to that 1,000 to 2,000 feet away on the other side, depending whatever movement they were trying to make. So this is an average of all four movements. You might have seen at the back of your memo, I have this data broken down by specific movement, and it's fairly interesting, and I'm happy to talk to you individually about it at the end of the meeting if you have questions, because you do see some different things throughout the day based on which movement you're making. But what this is telling us is that, the intersection as a whole, it's taking the longest to get through the intersection at 5 p.m. at night, which I think is not probably a big surprise to anybody, and that the average person going through the intersection at 5 o'clock, or not average, sorry, this is average. The average person going through the intersection at 5 o'clock at night takes them about 110 seconds from before they get to it to getting through it on the other side. So that's the average person at 5 o'clock. 110 seconds is about one full signal cycle. That signal takes about 120 seconds, which is about 2 minutes, to get through a full cycle. So the average person at 5 o'clock is getting through that intersection within one full cycle. You might kind of come up to it at the end of green, and you have to wait for it to get to, you don't quite get through it, and then you have to wait for the signal to go all the way around again to you. So that average person at 5 o'clock, it's taking about 110 seconds, so just under 2 minutes. The red line is 85th percentile, which is that means we're taking not just the average, but we're taking into account many of the people that it takes more than average. So basically 85 out of 100 people. So at 5 o'clock, 85 of 100 people were able to get through the intersection within 200 seconds. Now that's a little bit over 3 minutes. So you can see there's most people, so you would say at 85%, well over a majority of the people going through the intersection at 5 o'clock are getting through in a little over 2 minutes. So you can see that there's obviously congestion occurring in the morning too. The morning, the 85th percentile, the time to get through the intersection is about 175 seconds, just under 3 minutes. But what you can see throughout the day, though, it takes a little longer in the morning. It kind of flattens out through a good part of the day. The afternoon, it starts to take longer. But after 5 o'clock, things taper off pretty quickly. So does this kind of graph make sense to folks and kind of match what you experience?
What's the cycle time?
It's about 120 seconds.
So that means that an average person is getting through there on one cycle, but the 85th percentile is taking 2?
Yes. Yep. Okay.
Gets more interesting yet.
So we've talked a lot so what does this mean? We're kind of talking about travel time and how long does it take, or how many hours of the day is it good, or is it, take longer? And how do we compare that to the existing performance measure we have, which is volume to capacity ratio? So on here I've noted the volume to capacity ratios that we tested the 5 highest hours of the day. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we know that at the peak hour, the volume to capacity ratio currently is 0.97. So I've just noted that here. Volume to capacity ratios are very sensitive to decreases in traffic. So looking at the second and third and fourth highest hours of traffic, the volume to capacity ratio is 0.9, 0.92, 0.8. So we drop down the intersections today, the volume to capacity ratio, once you get past the 5 o'clock hour, or before, sorry, once you get, as you're approaching the 5 o'clock hour, that volume to capacity ratio is pretty significantly below the current threshold of 0.99. And in the morning, we're also it's measuring at about 0.79, so very similar to the afternoon peak. So what this tells us is that although at the PM peak hour today, we're very close to the threshold, as you move off the PM peak hour, the volume to capacity ratio goes down pretty significantly. I've done a little chart here. We're still looking at time of day here across the bottom. 5 o'clock, 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Here's our 5 p.m. But instead of this being that travel time, I put it, this is volume to capacity. So the green line, sorry, I'm a little shaky. The green line is the current volume to capacity ratio target of 0.99. And the blue line represents approximately what the volume to capacity ratio is today over the course of the day. The red line is a forecast of 2035. And these are estimates. I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that we know the forecast for the 5 o'clock hour in 2035. The TSP horizon year is 1.05. So that's what's represented here. And we know that in the future, as traffic volumes increase, there's really, our system can only accommodate so much traffic during 1 hour. So although there might be demand for more traffic in that peak hour, the system really won't let more people get to you or, get through. They're going to be held up at the next intersection, for example. So we know that it's not that the numbers are going to shoot really high during the PM, that 1 hour, but we know that we're going to see longer periods of traffic similar to what we experience at 5 o'clock. So what this is an approximation of what we think the volume to capacity ratios will look like over the course of the day in 2035. And these are an approximation. But so what you see? Yeah, sorry.
On the 2035. I'm just struggling with the numbers because you're looking at 9, doing the math right, 15 years?
Thank you.
And it's only going to go up from 99 to 105. That seems, just the growth is projected much greater than that, even in the rural areas, a minimum of 2% growth. So I'm not trying to pick apart the numbers, but it seems like the problem is even bigger than maybe what your chart is projecting.
Yeah, well, I think what you'll see is that the growth in the PM peak, the 1 peak hour, is the smallest compared to some of the other hours, like 4 o'clock, for example, or even 6 o'clock. So what we're going to see is, I think the peak hour traffic, daily traffic is going to be going up, consistent with our growth. But the peak hour growth rate is going to be a little bit slower because the system really can't accommodate, not just at this intersection, but system-wide, will not accommodate people to travel at that peak hour at the same level. So what you're going to see is longer periods of high traffic.
So everything will be gridlocked by 2035.
Well, that's what traffic engineers and planners are trying really hard to try to avoid gridlock by making sure you have a system that kind of functions even when it's still at mass, top capacity, identifying those bottlenecks, working on this traffic progression.
If I may, this might be a question for Laura, because we touched on this at our last meeting about planning, and I just wonder, being a planner, land use planner myself, if we consider that growth is always at the margin, we have a current population, and growth is incremental to that. So I just wonder if that's what the symptom is that it seems like there's a lot of growth, but it's still yet small in comparison to the city as a whole or our community as a whole today. I don't know if that is true or not, Laura.
Yeah, and there's going to be a few things going on. So we have some areas. And so first off, the model does anticipate full build out of the city and to our urban growth boundary with these concept plans. All of that's nested in this model. So you're seeing those rates come through. The other component is we, as a geographic area, grow, but also everything around us continues to grow, and you'll see that pass through trips. So regardless of what happens in the city, you're still going to see this growing demand on the intersection. Is that answering your question?
Because I think it's just sort of counter, because it feels like there's a lot of growth, and there is, the urban growth areas and also infill and redevelopment. So that's been accounted for, but I think it's still a small proportion at the margin to what our existing population base. I think that might be some of what the dynamic is going away. Why the change looks small in comparison to the rate of growth that's happening.
Right.
Sorry. And I think that Commissioner, and it's David, is that right? Damon.
Yeah, like Monday sideways.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, please.
Yeah, I mean, Laura pretty much hit it, but that 105 is what's in the Oregon City Transportation Plan. So it takes into account Oregon City's growth. But, if Beaver Creek ever incorporates, if, Molalla, Malino, all those places blow up, that's going to blow that curve all heck, because our data basically stops at our urban growth boundary.
So just to clarify, it goes into a regional model, and so all of the jurisdictions and the counties go into that same model. So I probably said that very wrong. So it accounts for all of the region's traffic growing at the same rate. What I meant to say is that the city's growth is one portion of a larger system growth that will still happen regardless of incremental development within the city.
But all you need is Malino Airport to turn into a subdivision and it's gone.
Yeah, so this is anticipating full build out by 2035 of the region, essentially.
What region?
Well, of Oregon Cities and Beaver Creek, and the coordinated growth forecast for 20 years for every other city.
So that includes Molalla and...
Yes, yeah.
Well,
They're
not part of Metro's model, but they are an input.
Yeah. So
all four counties.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Clark County and Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington counties. All of them are included in the Metro model.
So to answer the question, what's the region? So that we do pick up all that data. I think we're done with the flags up for now. So Susie, maybe just continue. And it is a very important graph to see. Like, does this make sense? And that's what you kind of pointed out, Bill. Like, does this make sense? And so it's important that we kind of come to terms. Please, John.
Sorry, I forgot about the card.
Yeah,
thing.
no, I could. Fortunately for you, I can see.
Yeah, I just want to. It's my understanding of that Metro model is that the Metro model not only considers growth in the region, it's widespread growth. So those inputs consider that, and they consider growth at the rate at which those communities have are planned for growth. And obviously, if there was some major adjustment, like some big region town center that was centered in the heart of Molalla that was never planned, that would be not included in that. But they're planning for the anticipated growth in those areas. And so, yeah, that model projects to the best that anybody's numbers have to include all that growth, inside, outside the region, inside, outside Oregon City.
I hope that's correct, because Metro does stop, John, at Caras, as you probably know.
I know.
Malalla's out, Estacada,
right.
Colton, all those areas.
Yeah.
I think as both Susie and John were saying, there's one of 4 county model.
Right. Exactly.
And then also the inputs to the Metro regional model to pick up the neighboring cities and communities. Yeah. Please, John.
If I can offer some assurance, because my boundary doesn't stop at the urban growth boundary.
Oh, there you go.
So I
and neither does ours.
If you accept it, I vouch for what they're saying. That
Great.
The models account for.
You would know.
It.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
I feel like I can speak for that. Yeah.
So Susie, are we to the tag recommendations? So the drama.
Yes. I guess I want you to know that this data was reviewed with the tag and helped inform how they came to their conclusion of recommending that the cities stay with the volume to capacity ratio as their measure, sticking with the 0.99 target. However, basically saying that target of 0.99 can be exceeded for no more than a certain number of hours per day. And that certain number is not decided yet. But when you look at this chart, you could say, should that be 3 hours? Should it be 4 hours? Should it be 2 hours? So they basically said, we like this measure, the 0.99, because it's very easy for us and easy for others to measure and monitor over time. But let's say that we can exceed that target a certain number of hours per day. They also mentioned that we needed to consider this at the 213 Redland Road intersection as well. And as I can speak to why that a little bit later today, but the why they recommended sticking with this measure, it was for those reasons that I just stated.
Can I ask one question on that? Sorry.
Bob has his tag up too, but Rick, please, sir, and then Bob.
Just what was the advantage of using that over, level of service as a fairly standard measure?
Mostly, I think, for consistency with the measure that's currently in place, and then to provide consistency with other ODOT intersections up and down the corridor that will continue to use that measure. They basically said it's the measure that is in place is consistent with the rest of the system, and it's a
just as kind of a follow-up to that, have you done any studies to look at how level of service compares with volume and capacity in that same horizon?
Not specifically here, but you can have level of service D and have it over capacity. You can also have F and it be under capacity. They tend to go up and down together a little bit, but not directly. So as a level of service is really about delay. And you can see here that this chart, the travel time, is also really about delay. And it is going up and down with volume to capacity pretty quickly. So
just a sort of bit of a foreshadowing here, and you probably, those of you that have read ahead in your PowerPoint printout, don't do it. But you can see that Susie's pacing you through a series of contemplations and then the tags response. So this is just the first of them. So I just want to say my little drum roll was probably a little excited there. It's just the first of many series of recommendations from the tag. But please, Bob has his tag up and has been waiting to make a contribution.
Well, as I understand it, we're knee-deep in a housing crisis, and we don't know how to get out of it. And we got to keep in mind that the elephant in the room is all these appeals that seem to be coming out of the woodwork to LUBA for zone changes and concept plans have to do with a lot of traffic. And that's one of the elements in land use planning for the state. So whatever we do, we have to coordinate and make sure that LUBA understands what we're up against when we start making zone changes and approving concept plans to transportation systems that exceed the capacity for the intersection. They're going to shoot back and say, oops, you haven't solved that. And they're going to remand stuff back to us. So it goes beyond just local and regional planning. It goes into the state planning as well. So whatever standards we come up with, LUBA is going to have to be aware of that, and that it's acceptable.
And yes, and that's exactly what this process is kind of for. I mentioned that the city has an obligation to the state to move forward with this because they did their transportation system plan and said, gosh, this coordinated land use and transportation is telling us we have an issue here that we can't solve. And essentially this is a process for exceptions to say we have a problem here that we can't solve. We still feel like our land use plan is the best plan for us, and we want this to be our land use plan. But we need an exception for this intersection. And so when you go through this process, it's agreed upon at the Oregon Transportation Commission level ultimately, and that essentially this is what you need to be able to get to allow the concept plans to go forward without an appeal to LUBA.
Or being able to withstand an appeal to LUBA.
Withstand an appeal to LUBA.
We can't limit the appeals, but we can make sure that Oregon City is protected.
Yeah, so this is the process that protects you through the LUBA, which the state is recognizing we are not going to be able to build our way out of congestion everywhere. We can't solve every problem, but we want to have this process. We still want to have our standards in place to protect us for good land use and transportation planning, to make improvements where we can, but we're going to create this exception process so that we can have some control when and where we're granting those exceptions, and it's agreed upon at the community. Instead of us just lifting up all standards everywhere, it's saying, okay, we're going to keep the standards, but we're going to have this exception process so that we meet it where it makes sense, and we have this exception process where it doesn't make sense.
I find that an interesting concept, is use that word control when we can't meet the standards that we've set for failure. How are you going to control that? How are you going to get other people to accept it?
That's what we're here. That's the meat of our discussion, our 3-meeting cycle. I think Laura has a contribution.
Yeah, I just wanted to recognize the toughness of this process, because we're balancing all of these regional needs. The need for mobility and trucks and people to get around, and the need for housing and affordable housing, and to stay within our urban growth boundary. And that's what makes this so tough, is trying to figure out where that balance is, because sometimes, like in the case of this intersection, the math just doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate this group very much and acknowledge that it's this larger balancing of all of our needs as a region.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. You didn't get a chance to introduce yourself at the beginning, so go ahead, please. No, well, you can come anytime, but please go ahead and introduce yourself. Yeah.
So I'm an engineering instructor at Clackamas Community College, and I'm a transit advocate, apparently. I'm sorry, we had a NASA talk today, so I had to organize that, but I'm a little late. I was curious, and I may have missed this, but I was curious if this is the biggest bottleneck, or if this is just, it sounds like it's one of many. Is this the worst bottleneck that we're working on? Is there anyone?
Great question from the Transportation System Plan. So it's completed in 2014. Either Laura or Susie, would you care to comment on that? John?
This is, for Oregon City, this is the most challenging in the sense that there's not a build-out, not affordable build-out opportunity. We've got other bottlenecks that there's solutions in our transportation system plan that we're planning for, and I'll talk a little bit about the funding of that.
Okay.
But this one here is unique in that the solutions are more than the community can afford to build.
Right. So maybe one follow-up really fast. So I was wondering about the alternative target in terms of like longer distance kind of things, because I saw that in the PowerPoint that was presented. Why was that recommendation not chosen, and instead the recommendation of this exception chosen? What was the reasoning behind that? As in, like, maybe a travel time between Redland Road and Molalla or something along those lines?
It had to do, the main reason to stick with the current measure, as opposed to many of them that had to do with travel time or reliability, just had to do, those are good measures for long-range planning, but once it comes to setting a standard, which then other people have to on a regular basis measure and predict, it requires a lot more fairly costly data, as well as different tools for measurement. So as far as accessibility for the city and for property owners and their consultants to be able to have a easily measurable and kind of reliable, consistent measure, it really came down to the recommendation. But we definitely want to look at travel time so we are looking at travel time when looking at when evaluating the long-term solutions, but as far as setting it as a standard that becomes a benchmark for many people to measure and monitor over time, it became more challenging.
Okay, thank you.
So speaking of all this talk of time,
yeah,
I want to do just a quick time check if we could. So you may have noticed on your agenda that in one scenario, Susie would have gone through a lot of material, and then we would have opened it up for discussion. This is just a fine way to take questions and comments and clarifications all the way through, because they're really important. I appreciate the level of detail that members are asking for to be able to understand what goes into the ultimate recommendation. So it's certainly time worth well spent. If we want to adjourn at 8. I might suggest that Susie kind of move through the rest of the elements, and then what happens at the end of the PowerPoint is a loop back to the series of questions. So perhaps we should go there and then really take our time in the discussion of considering each of the tag recommendations. But if you have a burning question, certainly raise your tag. But I just want to give us all a time check. Thank you.
Okay. So the Technical Advisory Committee also discussed a number of safety measures and wanted to make sure that any decision that was made for the intersection, we were having safety in mind. And we talked about a number of different ways to look at safety from a crash rate, just the number of crashes occurring on an annual basis compared to the number of cars going through it. Crash frequency, just a straight up number of how many crashes are occurring regardless of the ratio to traffic. And excess proportions of specific crash types, which is looking at what kind of crashes are happening and how does that compare to statewide averages for similar intersections. And what the recommendation was that we should, I'm going to start talking about some other improvements here at the next little section of my presentation, but as we talk about some of these improvements, the TAG recommended that we do a predictive safety analysis looking at the improvements that we deem to be or we can determine are financially feasible, and looking at the growth and say, can we demonstrate what is the impact on the predicted crashes? Can we do enough improvements to offset at least the impacts of growth from a safety perspective? So they basically directed us to please consider this prediction of safety with the improvements we're looking at in tandem with the performance measure. So now I'm going to kind of move on to what are some of those additional improvements that we could do at the intersection, short of the major improvements that we discussed at the last meeting. And so these are on table 5 in your memo. So adopting alternative mobility target doesn't mean we have to do nothing at the intersection. So we want to look at what can we do in tandem. Some lower cost improvements, things that could speak directly to improving the safety and that are cost feasible. My bullets on my slide happen to follow the table. There was a few options at the top. The first 3 in the table that were not recommended by the technical advisory group, which was increasing all red time, just because that it provides more clearance time. It's red longer, where everybody at the intersection is in red for an extra second or two to provide more clearance time between different people getting green lights. It has a negative impact on congestion, kind of exacerbating some of the issues we're trying to address. Installing red light cameras, which is an assessment that the city went through last year, and we can, I'm sure John can talk about that later if there's questions about that. And increasing shoulder width, particularly on the Highway 213 approach coming from I-205. What was recommended by the technical advisory group was to help make the intersection more complete for pedestrians by providing pedestrian countdown signal displays, improving the lighting really for all users, and then to dive a little bit deeper into some more medium cost improvements that many of these were discussed and brought up by you all at our last meeting, to provide an acceleration lane for people making a right turn from Beaver Creek headed north on 213 towards I-205, and possibly looking at eliminating the westbound left turn lane at 213 and Beaver Creek Road, so that space could be reallocated to help with the queuing for people turning left onto Maple Lane.
And just to clarify, there's 2 left turn lanes there, so it would eliminate one of them. There'd still be a left turn.
No. That's not what we're talking about.
You're completely eliminating both those lanes?
Just, you want to...
Yeah. It would be, yes, you would not be able to make a left turn there. This would have to go, people would have to make that turn at Myers Road, when Myers Road went through. So this is not something we would do before that occurred. So there's currently not many people turning left there. It's actually the lowest movement at the entire intersection. I want to say it's only about...
It's the second lowest because the northbound left is very low as well.
Okay. It's about, maybe Christine can look up the number. I want to say it's only about one vehicle a minute. But they would have alternatives to use Myers Road to get to 213 South. They could also go through the intersection and make it at...
Do you mean Beaver Creek Road South?
Yes, I'm sorry, did I say?
So I just want to be clear, we're talking westbound here, so this is if you're traveling from the high school, heading into Oregon City, making a left onto 213 southbound. That's the left. The left you're talking about is the highest moving, or one of the highest moving legs, where we're extending we're actually going to do a construction project this summer to extend those, but we're not eliminating
the one
those.
from Fur.
Thank you.
There are 2 left turn lanes. Move your right there.
Yep,
there are
correct.
2 left turn lanes there. You only need 1. And then you can use the second left turn lane, just eliminate it, and you've got that entire line to queue for. Yeah. There's 2 left turns there, and you only need to eliminate 1 of them.
Right.
It's
Okay.
good.
Sorry.
Thank you. We'll make sure we consider that. So.
Yeah, because I've got actual number data, and there's only 70 cars that went through there at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, so we can look at that option of having 1 lane versus 0 lanes, but part of the idea was that could be done at, people could turn at Myers Lane instead.
But they'd also go through the community college too. I mean, if you're that far north on Beaver Creek Road, you're going to go through the community college and wind all around there because it's shorter than.
Yeah, or you could go through and use Fur, or even all the way up to Malala. If many of them are even congested to Malala Avenue, anyways, making.
But there's a major development going to happen in that northeast corner, and they're not going to want to come out and turn and drive down to Myers when they're trying to get to, On Point or, Safeway.
Good point. So the technical advisory group's recommendation in this case was, as I said, to kind of evaluate these groupings of improvements to see what is necessary to offset the safety impacts predicted from growth, to make sure we're kind of at a net zero predicted change in the crash rate at the intersection, and to assess what level of improvements can be incorporated and still be in the financially transportation system plan. So that was the TAG's recommendation. So what that means is basically there would be a little bit more assessment of these along with before we come back to you at the next meeting. But with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to John for a few moments to talk about funding.
So some of you might remember, because some of you that live in the community participated in this, but in 2012 we went through our transportation system plan update, and out of that came $22 million worth of recommended projects, walking, biking, driving solutions. And that was a robust list, a good list, a vetted list with the community. And out of that, we were able to establish through the analysis of what we collect for system development charges or gas tax revenues that could be spent on capital, that we could fund 123 million of that, and the balance of that, the 98.3 million, was determined unfunded. And that's not to say that we can't obtain grants from that, but it's this question of can we project funding for that project list, and if so, we identify that. If the others out there, we're still got this project need. So the TSP is a lot about establishing what the community need is for movement of traffic, movement of pedestrians. We pull all that together, and then we really kind of determine through that funding scenario how much we can actually afford to build. So in this case, for Oregon City, it was 123 million. 109 of that was collected via SDCs, and for several years now, Oregon City has had the highest transportation SDC in the area. And right now, our transportation SDC per dwelling unit, so for every house you build, if you're a new builder and you come into Oregon City to get a building permit, you're going to spend $8,841 to build for that charge for a transportation system development charge. And so I just really kind of wanted to say, if I go back to that, is we've been talking about SDCs in Oregon City for a couple of years. Well, we've talked about SDCs a long time, but more recently, especially the business community, is that number can significantly increase for a commercial kind of development, because we basically extrapolate that number based on the number of trips that are generated through business. And so we're hearing lots of frustration with Oregon City because new development is impacted by that fee. And so we've been talking about ways to mitigate that or buy that down or reduce our list or whatever it is we're going to do. I would just say that we hear regularly and that our transportation SDCs are just too high. A lot of that's got to do with the age of our community and the needs of our community and the topography of our community, the fact that we got 3 state highways through our community. All that kind of lends itself to high transportation improvement needs, or high number of improvement needs at a relatively high cost.
So the likelihood of raising STCs for additional projects probably would not be warmly received in the community.
Right. That's a challenge we've been trying to balance. So the next piece that we've kind of put together is, and we've got this list of projects that we talked about last time. We spent a fair amount of time talking about projects, and some of those were lower cost projects, less than $5 million. Some of them were suggested that they would be $25 million or greater than $25 million. We haven't put a lot of effort into that, but look in those larger scale projects. But this group recommended that we keep the interchange option, which was different than what the technical advisory group recommended, mostly because the technical advisory group is most informed about the availability of funding across the region, right? This group said, hey, you need to think bigger than that. There's growth potential outside the city, and there's always question about these model numbers. Are they really accurate or not? So this group said, hey, we think you ought to consider that interchange, right? And so for me, I was feeling very frustrated about that, because I knew it's definitely more than a $25 million project. It's probably, at that intersection, given the challenges of that intersection, it's probably a $50 to $75 million project. So that was concerning. That was when I said, yeah, you're right, we probably need Clackamas County and ODOT in the room to kind of help us tell the story about how challenging funding across the region really is. And then really Kittleson put this slide together, which I think was helpful to say, what does a certain amount of funding look like in a system development charge or an assessment or some other funding mechanism? And so we just asked, well, let's look at $10 million. So if we were going to build a $10 million project and try to collect that revenue from our citizens, if we tried to do it from the current folks, so we did more of a citywide assessment district, it would cost each dwelling $769 per dwelling unit. So imagine an assessment on your tax statement that says you're going to help fund this project all on the backs of the existing residents. The other option is no, this is all growth related, so just like our system development charges, every new home, every new business, those folks should have to pay for this increase. And so if we put that on what we're projecting for growth, an additional 8,000 households, we based it on households. We didn't look at commercial so much, but that's $1,250 per dwelling unit.
John, how long is the 8,000? How long would it take to build?
That's build out. That's 2035, if I'm correct. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's our build out projection.
Okay.
And then, you know, if we again look at more on an overall full build out, and I'm not quite even sure how we would do this, but if we were to spread it across all of those, it's $476 per unit. And so it's a big ask, and it's part of the reason why it didn't show up in the last transportation system plan. And I think it's also why the technical advisory committee kind of realized that that's unlikely even for a $10 million. Imagine a $50 million project. So really take those numbers and multiply them by 5. It's a good. I think it was a good measure at $10 million to just kind of show that. And I really don't want to put John or Mike on the spot, but you can help kind of inform the likelihood of what the current funding outlook is or future funding outlook to the degree with your crystal ball.
So I'm happy to say a couple things about that. That is a lot of money. The way to get projects of that size, for a local agency, especially in this state, your options are very, very limited. If you're talking about a $50 million project, generally the state legislature would have to put it in a bill and say, here's $50 million, probably a big part of a transportation bill. The transportation bill that's being discussed now down in Salem, it's hard to say, but the projects they're potentially looking at are things like I-205 and 217 and the Rose Quarter. Those are the 3 big ones being mentioned statewide.
This region.
The Portland region. And so everyone's focus is on that. $50 million asks there's not much of a way to do it right now. The federal government, way back when, used to do some earmarks. They haven't for quite some time. I've heard a rumor that might come back, but that would still be, I think, a major long shot for that. There's other federal grants like Tiger, but those generally go to much larger jurisdictions and much larger scope projects that affect a lot more people. So, ODOT just did the Sunrise Phase 1. That was up probably $150 million. That was a 30-year in the making project. Only did a little bit of it. It's great, but certainly not the whole thing. But that's 30 years in the making. And that was enacted by the Oregon legislature that said, put in the law, as part of all these fees, we're going to give $100 million to ODOT, and that made that project whole. So it's opportunities for raise money like that are not really, and 20 years from now, who knows? But right now, if it's not I-205 or 217 or Rose Quarter, when you're talking about that level of investment, they're generally not talking about it.
John, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I could tell more. I could pour more tears into the beer. If you wanted more examples, in Washington County, the story is the same. They want widening of 217. We're scrapping together tens of millions of dollars there when they really want a $1 billion project. Washington County is trying to convince Multnomah County to turn Cornelius Pass Road into more of a highway grade road. That's a $1 billion project. So by that comparison, 50 million seems like peanuts. Like, hey, no problem. Hey, all we're asking for is 50 million. But still, the story that Mike and John are telling you is the truth. That's to get $50 million. What we are primarily working on, what ODOT is primarily working on in this part of the region is completing the Sunrise out to 172nd Avenue and upgrading the Abernathy Bridge to be wider to carry more traffic and to be seismically resilient. And after that, to widen out 205 to the full 6-lane cross-section all the way from Oregon City down to Stafford Road. So that's what's on the shopping list in the tens and hundreds of millions range kind of in front of you on the list. So I can't candidly say anything other than this is not on my radar to put tens of millions of dollars into this intersection in the near or long term.
I could add one more thing also, that I know from a county's perspective, if there is new funding, we're definitely looking for maintenance funding and not so much capital funding. We're desperate for maintenance funding. So, and I know, I'm guessing the cities are the same way. I know all the counties in Oregon are in the same boat. So if there's new money in the legislature coming out, our first ask is definitely for maintenance.
Kirsten, can I add one more thing, aside from the sob story about the lack of money? As we sit here and talk about mobility policy, the most difficult question that I grapple with is mobility for whom? And in that regard, when we look at the graphs that Susie showed, there's a peak period, there's no doubt. You know, things are worse, and if you lived in this community for a long time, I'm sure they're a lot worse than when you began living here, began doing business. And the notion that in 2035, rush hour is going to be rush 4 hours. The question that I face is, on one hand, what would it cost for me to provide commuters of this region with the desirable level of service throughout rush hour from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. It's an extraordinary cost. On the other hand, one of my other mobility targets is what would it cost me to ensure that especially goods movement between, say, 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. has the ability to travel in a reliable manner through the region. Because often the investments are different. And I would say that considering those things, the louder voice in this region at this time is to ensure the reliability of movement during the middle of the day, which we've traditionally called the off-peak. Off-peak to commuters, it's very much the on-peak to the economy. So that's saying, I look at those graphs and in that, wearing that sort of that framework, that graph looks pretty good to me. That looks like you can move around from 9 to 3. You know, you can get your goods to market. Our businesses can deliver. The people who are dispatch-based, service economy, running door to door all day long can get to their appointments. And I've got places in the region where that's not true. And so my choice tends to go towards I want to try to solve the problems in this region where you can't have a reliable trip in that midday 9 to 3 window, and accept that we are going to have congestion during the peaks, and try to do other things to mitigate that as much as possible. But that's the kind of trade-off, given the fact that we don't have money to fix potholes, much less build new stuff. I'm looking at the trade-off between the goods movement during the day and the people movement during the peaks.
So keeping in mind, I just want to give us a reality check. So those are very serious and sobering comments. Our deliberations will continue tonight and also at our third meeting. So we are not going to, hash this out and come to an agreement tonight. But I think what Susie wants to do, and the team and John would like to do, Dana, is to get the issues on the table, the TAC recommendation, establish a, common nomenclature and understanding around the table, and then, by our third meeting, be recommending something, and you're here for reasons with all your thinking hearts and minds and your experiences and interests, and but I think it's very valuable, and I think we all appreciate John and Mike being here and John inviting them, so that we have a really clear-eyed view of what the likelihood is if we pursue. So thanks for your patience. Christina has our tag up, and then Henry, please.
Just one thing I find really interesting from a realtor's perspective is the communities that seem so desirable are Sellwood and Orenco Station, and it's walkability, and it's attracting businesses that are incentivizing their people to live, work, and play in the same community, so that there just isn't the need to have the commuters on the road at all. If I could walk down the street and go to dinner with my husband and walk in the other direction and go to work and never get in a car, amen, that would be ideal. So I think the one way we can address these things is not just, wow, the more people that move into this area, the more daunting this becomes. It's let's look at, because I know a lot of us sit on many committees, let's look at the whole live, work, and play scenario, so that we're just not facing this uphill climb that's insurmountable, when really the quality of life, people say to me over and over again, man, if I could get me into Selwood, get me into Westmoreland, and it's because they can walk. They can walk to dinner, they can walk to their kids' school. Orenco Station is a planned community, you know, where the people are riding bikes to work, and some of them just get rid of their cars. There's huge value in that, huge value.
It's another legitimate perspective for sure. Thank you. Please, Henry.
Well, I am going to say that appreciate all the things about people saying there's not enough money to go around, which I agree with. But my main part discussion right now should be because about half of the people using that intersection aren't city residents at all and don't want to go to city destinations. Why should the city pay for it in total? Why shouldn't all of the various agencies in the area kick in a little?
Well, that scenario was the scenarios of per household was, you know, just to sort of illustrate what if, but it doesn't preclude a funding, you know, a funding recommendation or agreement that would be multiple sources.
If I expand my area to be 100,000 families or whatever, that number goes way down.
That's what would happen, though. I mean, no city, maybe Portland, who knows, but no city's going to build a $50 million project. If it happened, all the projects we're talking about are going to come from federal or state or some kind of regional pot that currently is not available. But yeah, it would have to be that way.
Susie, do you want to keep marching through? I think that's all the time.
I am just about done. I've just got two recap slides, and then Kirsten will continue to help facilitate this discussion. So just, this is a little bit of kind of high-level overview here. We agree. The city is really not able to fund a major intersection improvement on its own. They have an obligation to this state to develop an alternative mobility target, as kind of decided through the TSP. The city can implement an alternative mobility target and look for financially feasible improvements to do in combination to try to mitigate some of the safety impacts of increasing traffic. And that there is interest in the community in identifying a regional long-term solution. So, to summarize the technical advisory group's recommendation, it was recommending the alternative mobility target to be volume to capacity ratio based, keeping the 0.99, but basically allowing that to be exceeded a specific number of hours per day. Looking at applying this at the 213 Redland intersection road as well. That intersection has an improvement in the TSP. It has a regionally kind of agreed upon solution. It was the next phase of the jug handle project. It is in the city's TSP, but it is not in the city's financially constrained TSP for many of the same reasons of issues with the Beaver Creek intersection. But it has the advantage of at least having the regionally agreed upon solution. It's just not cost constrained. But therefore, because it is not in the cost constrained plan, it also needs an alternative mobility standard in order for the concept plans to be able to kind of stand up to LUBA, as was mentioned. Basically would like to see consistency between these two intersections in whatever measure moves forward. They recommended we assess the predicted crash rate of the intersection with the growth and see if there are financially feasible offsetting safety improvements. In combination with that, assessing what can be incorporated into the financially constrained TSP, and the technical group supports the community's desire to identify a long-term solution.
They don't,
and so
that they don't oppose it. I mean, they weren't.
They don't oppose it.
Yeah.
They said there's no reason that you cannot do it.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily encouraging, but they recognize and understand the community sentiment. And so here's kind of two discussion items, and I'm going to turn it now over to Kirsten to take us through, and I'm going to be in listening mode.
Not for long. So
And
answer
answer.
it. Quick rest. So this first question is, this recommendation, the technical advisory committee recommendation, maintain the current, there's kind of that unpack it or diagram it. There's a couple of recommendations in there to use the VC tool, and then to allow the intersection to exceed the ratio for no more than a specific numbers of hour per day. So that's one, and then perhaps even we could pick up 213 and Redland next week. But we proposed April 20th at our next meeting. So just saying, thinking about this, our primary please go. Oh, sorry, pardon me. Please, thank you. I thought I was going to cough earlier, so I forgot to turn it back on. So this notion of, just to repeat quickly, but this notion of can we live with, or how do we feel, and we might want to just go around the table so we ensure that all perspectives are heard. Do community advisory group members support the first question, kind of using the VC target, and then probably most importantly, can we live with congestion for more hours a day than we're currently expected to see using our existing standard? That would allow, concept plans to move forward. It would mean living with a little more congestion, going through 2 cycles at the light. So what did we say earlier, John? It's less than, at its worst case, it's less than 5 minutes. These guys think in seconds. I have to get my calculator out and always, divide by 60, but it seems like at its worst case, at the peak period, it's less than 5 minutes at an intersection. That's it, full build out. So can we live with anything up to and through that, recognizing some of these longer term solutions are, at the outside realm of possibility. Not that we can't advocate for them, but you've just heard that it's a uphill battle along the lines of Sunrise. I almost would like to just go around on that one, if we could. John, are you a participating member? Do you have an opinion here? Or do you as kind of a staff?
I'd say I'm the staff.
Okay, yeah. So you were within the tag. You would be within
Yes.
the technical advisory group recommendation. And you feel like we've stated the proposition correctly?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Christine, I'm picking on you. I know you didn't even make the last meeting, so how do you feel about this kind of notion?
I feel like I could live with it, especially, I don't know if this was brought up before, but if there was a camera that I could log in, it's kind of like Mount Hood.
Yes.
I can make a decision whether I'm going to travel right now or not, because oftentimes I have a choice of, where and when I'm going. I don't have to be at a desk at a certain time.
Right.
And so if I can make an educated decision, I'd be more apt to do that. Yeah. So I think I could live with it.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Merchant, Bill.
I can live with the vehicle capacity ratio. I'm concerned about the length of time we allow the intersection to become gridlocked. And we say 3 to 5 hours.
3 to 5 hours, that's right.
Right. That is a fairly long period of time. And I appreciate John's idea that really if we want to keep the area economically viable, we have to let people go through the middle of the day. But as that time period gets longer, then the time period in the middle of the day gets squashed up, and it starts to impact that. So I'm not keen on accepting 3 to 5 hours a day. So.
Can you clarify? You wouldn't express a standard as 3. You would pick something. You would say 3 or 4 or 5.
Right.
Thanks for
Okay,
clarifying that.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think if we know that we wanted to confirm through this that we're on the right path, and then at our next meeting, that would be probably, we would make a specific recommendation for your feedback.
That's if you can get used to the Kirsten Green method of note taking, that box means that's unsolved. So okay, so what would that period of time be? Just along the lines of what John and Susan just said. We still need to kind of hone in on that. But point well taken. You're crimping in on the economic development. Please, Damon, please, Commissioner. How about you? What's that?
Ditto.
Okay, thank you. Short and sweet. I almost didn't hear you. It was so quick. Thank you. Please, Luke.
Yes, I think Clackamas Community College should live with both of those pieces.
Can live with and further investigate the time period, but can live with the volume, capacity, et cetera. Okay, thank you. All right, please, Nathan.
Yeah, as representing the development stakeholders, it would definitely be feasible to accept the higher volume capacity ratio, especially when the new development stakeholders would be impacted by the new SDCs
Right.
as a potential for payment in that area. And we also have to look at this. We keep talking about how this is a regional intersection, so we have to look at its regional capacity, and there's other points along these corridors, not just this intersection alone. So there's other areas that will be impacted, and so I think Susan brought together very well that the V over C won't necessarily be over capacity on its own, because you have the constraints from the other signals going on Beaver Creek Road and the highway at 213.
Thanks. Thank you. Michelle, please.
So short and sweet, yes.
Okay. Yes and yes. Okay.
Yes and yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Ms. Markler passing, and then Rick, please, Mr. Gibbon.
Well, I guess the bottom line is, why should we be any different than anywhere else in the metro area? You get on 205 at 3 o'clock and you're sitting there until 6. So, yeah, I think that there's not much doubt that we have to accept something like that. But I guess I share your concern about the length of it. I hope it's more like 3-hour period than 5.
So it'd be provocative to look at our next meeting as what does 3 hours solve? You know, what does 4 hours solve? They don't do it in half-hour increments, no half sizes? 3.5? No? Okay. All right. Thank you. Eric, Mr. Lee, thank you.
That's fine. I'd like a more quantitative look as well. That would be nice. But I kind of, I feel that the people have been talking about economic development, and I feel like mostly this is a bypass. I mean, it's even called the bypass by many people of Oregon City, and to me, bypasses aren't vehicles for economic development. They're ways to divert traffic around the economic development that we're looking for in the city. And so, in my mind, that's fine. I know that Beaver Creek is kind of that's the other road, so that one is part of our community. But I wanted to bring that up too. And in general, yes, as well as my thought.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for those important clarifications, observations. Mr. Avison.
Well, I appreciate the comment about bypass, but in the case of Molalla, we have 2 routes. We have Highway 211 and we have Highway 213, and that's it. And so a city that's trying to grow, and there is substantial growth and opportunities and some good employment lands in Molalla, which actually, you know, we're trying to get there, which will keep some of that traffic off 213, because if they can work there and shop there, that's going to help. But it is really our main arterial from Molalla to 205. Now, if we had a freeway to 205, then it probably would back all the way up to Henrici Road. You know, so I know that's not an answer either. I think one thing, and again, don't want to argue with John here, but the purpose of the act in Region 1 is to work for all 4 counties that are part of the act, and also look at rural and urban dollars. And although the 3 priorities are 217, 205, and particularly the Abernathy Bridge, we all know how bad that is, there is going to be some priorities for some of the rural areas. And maybe not 50 million, but you know, let's say you guys could come up with, you need 5 million, maybe that could slip through with enough people behind it. But don't give up on ODOT and their money, because I think, John, you know, there is some availability for the rural areas. Anyway,
So, Bill, thank you. Well said, and huge thanks to Christine for just taking a very complete summary over there. So, I want to just clarify, how do you feel about V over C as a tool?
The 99%?
No, just the VC ratio piece. Yeah,
that's
fine.
That's fine. I don't really feel like I'm part of the community to vote on that.
Sure.
Outside of Oregon City.
And then, so your concern about this living with just looking at this one. Yes, you know, the TAG's recommendation of accepting more congestion for a period of time. It doesn't mean you're foregoing the right to advocate for other dollars and solutions. So you want to withhold that right to advocate for a more comprehensive, longer-term solution. Acknowledging that right, you know, is still there. How do you feel about considering an alternate mobility standard to allow a little bit, you know, longer congestion at this intersection?
Well, I think we almost have to. I mean, what are our choices?
Right. So kind of stay tuned for that discussion at the next meeting of how many hours it is and dig into that, but you're not blocking necessarily looking at that.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Please.
So if I give you the short answer now, do I get a chance to loop back and say some other things later?
I would go for it right now.
Go for it right now. Ooh, maybe shouldn't have said that.
Go for the short. Go for the short. Go for the short. Give Christine a break. Go for the short. Give us your vote and then unpack it. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the right way to measure it. I'm fine with that. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think it's only going to go to 1.05. When I look at 8,000 additional homes on top of 13,000. I realize they're not all going to travel through that intersection, but more than that little bit is. And I hear what Susan said about that it'll flatten out instead of going up at the peak, but I'm not buying that either. I think it's going to affect the worst peak hour just as much as it does other times of the day. Just what I think. I wonder, okay, so what happens if we accept 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours? What happens when that breaks? Because it will, before 2035, if the city keeps growing. Just one question and one other point. I think it's really important that we get in the notes Damon's comment. We're only talking about removing one left turn lane, and that does two things. It eliminates that constraint that you have to reroute people to Myers Road or Fur or whatever, because there still will be a left. So it's important for that reason. It also, to me, it becomes a very low-cost project. I mean, all you got to do is move that divider over one lane, and you have to take out a stoplight. Are there 2 lights up there? There are. But it wouldn't be, I mean, that would be a very low-cost project, and it's not constrained by no left turn there. And then this is just a question. Do those countdown pedestrian signals, are those proven to save lives? Are they safer? Because I go through a string of them on my way to work in southeast Portland, and it's almost like it's more of a license for the driver to speed up because he sees it going 3, 2, 1. So, that's just a question. So, that's it. But I'm fine with that measurement.
So the VC you're comfortable with, and I'm hearing, probably a significant level of discomfort with accepting higher levels of congestion without going for, is it a more significant solution that you'd be preferring?
Well, I think, in all honesty, we're just kicking the can down the road. I think we need to do the lower cost solutions now, like that run out lane northbound for the northbound right turn, and reducing that one left turn down to one left turn. I think we need to do those things right away. But a few years from now, we're going to be scratching our heads again, I think.
And we don't, so it is certainly possible to continue to advocate for a longer term, more comprehensive solution. That's why we might want to take up a little bit more in depth at our next meeting, sort of unpacking what does 3, 4, 5 look like? What does the suite of, more affordable improvements look like as a whole? And then, it might raise some comfort, and we haven't even made it all the way around the table yet, but to know that you're not giving up your right to advocate, as they did in the Sunrise and other areas, for a major long-term improvement over time. But we just want to kind of be realistic in the short term, might be a hybrid. So thanks for your honesty, your comments. Please, Commissioner.
If the vehicle volume to capacity ratio is how ODOT looks at all ODOT facilities, it only makes sense to have that be the one that we use here. If we're already at 99% or 99 at peak now, it's hard to believe that we're not going to get to full within a few years, especially if some of these developments start happening. So people are going to be upset about the increase in traffic. And it's a pragmatic approach to widen the number of hours where congestion is acceptable, but that's going to be at a political cost. And as a commissioner, I'm concerned about that because I'm going to be the ones facing the pitchforks.
We want you to stay clear, at least a good buffer between you and those pitchforks. So that's for sure. Interesting. Well, so thank you. And that's, you know, you don't need my commentary to say that there might be, you know, with this hybrid of, you know, doing the short-term fixes now while maintaining an advocacy option gives people something to go to, you know, and to, you know, to understand that we're not just giving up, and that there might be a longer-term, you know, advocacy angle that you're not you're not removing that right. Thank you. Please, Henry. Sir.
Well, my perspective is that with 45 years of dealing with government stuff, it's too easy to say that we have to accept and change, because every time we get to a spot, it's going to happen again. We're never going to say hold the line. I think we ought to hold at 99, and that we ought to keep an unfunded recommended for a long-term total solution and build out as we can incrementally toward that solution. That would mean that the left turn lanes, the right-hand lanes that can be installed, that would supplement and be able to be reused in a full interchange, be done. So they're done, 20 years ahead of time. So what? But I don't think we should give up the 99. We should also say that it's forced upon us because we cannot afford to go and do it now.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, sir. I think you've turned your tag away from me, but I think it's Bob.
Yep, it's Bob.
Thank you. Sir.
Well, I'm looking at it from a pragmatic point of view. There's some people here that are going to be responsible for implementing that, and one's to my left and the other fellow's across the room, and my term on the planning commission is going to be over in a year, so I'm going to get my time machine and accelerate. But technically, maybe we can get our way through this quagmire, but politically, I don't think the public's going to buy it. And if they don't buy it, then this puts the commission into a position of how are they going to justify approving it? Because the volume of traffic at that intersection is going to increase. At the planning commission level, when we look at zone changes, we're going to have to, and I look at Damon because he's the wordsmith here, to make a motion that will justify changing a zone when we know it's going to result in the increase of traffic, which is going to push it over the 99. And then we've got a situation where somebody says, aha, gotcha, I'm going to appeal to LUBA. They didn't do it in their own ordinances, in their own policies. So from a pragmatic point of view, I mean, you got yourself into a real situation here. A lot of it is not our fault because it's a regional intersection. It's not Oregon City's intersection per se. It's only geographically in our boundaries, and that's why we have to take the lead on this. But like I say, if we had the money, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. So some way we've got to convince the public and put it in our policies that we're serious about doing it, that we're going to go after this money and we're going to solve that problem. Because if we do kick the can down the road, we're just sitting here wasting an evening when I could be home watching the awards. I was the one responsible for the mix-up on the envelopes.
We found you. We should let them know.
But I think that we've got to address these issues and be honest with ourselves. We just can't foist this off onto the commission and say, here, it's your football. You see, because the planning commission is involved in this too. They've got to make findings, and which got to stand up in court. It never used to be that way years ago. But now it is, and thank God, because it makes us toe the mark and be serious about what we're talking about. So that's pretty much where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Ma'am, would you like to chime in? Staff, city staff. All right. Can't rake you there. So I wanted to just clarify with Henry. My apologies. Are you okay with the V over C? That part of it, keeping that as the tool, keeping that as the measure.
I I have a basic dislike of V over C because you cannot define the terms adequately, period.
We here
but-
or in general?
Well, you can, V is definable, C is undefinable. But there is no viable option that will be accepted, so.
Makes it so reluctant acceptance, probably of that
It isn't
way.
even a reluctant acceptance.
Yeah.
It's acknowledgement of a fact accomplished.
There you go, okay.
May I make one
Please.
closing statement?
Yeah, please, there's a couple tags up, but please go ahead.
I don't like to hear this, we have no choice.
Yep.
Because planning commissions better have a choice, because it's called findings, and a reason to do what they do, because they recommend to the commission.
Of course.
And you don't want to put the commission into a corner.
No.
You know, that's not our purpose, and we want to not make it easy for them. No, but we want to make it real for them. This is the real facts as we see them, and on the record. We're going to put this into the record. It's going to be challenged. We know that.
Of course.
So when we say we don't have a choice, yes, we do.
Right.
It's a four-letter word. It's called denial. We deny this application because we don't have the capacity to serve it.
Sure, right. I see what you mean. I don't know who was up first, but Luke, if we could hear from you, and then Damon, please.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the safety impacts. I don't know if this is the right time.
Sure. Let's see, you're ahead of us, aren't you?
No.
Is that right in this one, Susie?
It was part of the second question, but it might be separate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to think about, as we look at the safety improvements, I wanted to know whether there had been consideration of widening the sidewalks approaching the intersections so they could be converted into shared use paths to provide a safer and easier way for people biking and walking to get through the intersection. Because as we're moving to, as we're expecting vehicle traffic to go up, it's going to become increasingly dangerous for people to be biking through there on the existing bike lanes.
So did you have an answer on that now, or is it something to consider and bring back?
It'd be something to consider and bring back. But one of the from the first meeting, the retaining walls in the northeast and northwest corners are the big driving fact on cost. So I mean, it's something that we can look at for the next meeting.
And then also especially, I know there's difficulty in the north, but on Beaver Creek specifically, that would be a good thing to look at.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So stay tuned. Make sure we're going to be checking you here in about 5 minutes on the next meeting date. So hopefully you can make April 20th. You won't get the answer to the questions, so you have to come back down. Please, Commissioner Damon.
Okay, well, I was nice and waited until the end to put all my questions in one basket.
Oh.
But first, one of the things that was in our meeting notes that Dan Fowler mentioned was the idea of changing pedestrian access to only the southbound side. You only cross the southbound. If you want to cross north to south, you don't do it at the intersection, you do it up at First Street and you do it at Maple. And then you come down the south side of Beaver Creek. I think that with a number, a countdown timer works because you're too far away to see the countdown, but the pedestrians can see it. So they can see there's 4 seconds to go. It's time to start running. As opposed to the drivers who are coming up the hill, it's clear across the intersection. They're not going to necessarily see the countdown, especially if you put a shield up. You put the little blinder up. But so I think that would be useful, especially if we're going to have developmental growth there, to get people used to right off the bat, I'm going to cross the street at these other intersections and stay away from the highway, except to cross it at that one point. Should there ever be an interchange there, then you can do pedestrian underpasses or whatever, so on and so forth. And I was looking at Sarah's beautiful little graphs here, and the first thing that came to my mind is it would really be useful on this average graph to have a line that says you don't stop at all. If you're going 25 miles an hour, this is how many seconds it would take you to get from point A to point B, to cross through this zone. So I'd know how much delay is actually happening versus how much is just, if it's already going to take me 60 seconds, then, 75 is like, who cares? It means I catch a light every 5th time I go through. So that line would be very useful in there. And I'm looking at these graphs like, God, got to kind of challenge your methodology. I see this huge spike at 8 p.m. of 8 minutes waiting to go make a turn. That's 4 cycles of light, and there's only 7 cars there. What are they doing? Are they on their cell phones and they're missing the lights as they go by? I mean, so it just so happens that Monday night, Mr. Givens was kind enough to give us these actual counts for the intersections at the peak times and the Planning Commission. And, it makes me wonder, when we're looking at these peak times and these VC, well, for one thing, you say your one graph had that the VC in the morning is only 0.79. If you ignore 500 cars making a turn in the morning. Otherwise, it's a failure of 1.04. So I don't think we can say it's 0.79 if we have a failure right now. If we're going to just ignore a lane of traffic, let's ignore the one in the middle, and now we don't have any cars, and it's no big problem. But, I'd like to know where, and I tried to figure it out through these graphs, where is our VC failure happening? Where are we getting to 0.9 whatever? Because I see the southbound lane is practically flat. Those guys are just driving through and making their turns. They're having no problem going up the hill, heading off to Moala. Is it the left-bound turn lane for Beaver Creek? Okay, let's fix that left turn. Let's adjust the lights. Let's do, whatever we need to do. Because maybe we don't need a major interchange. We need one more lane or, a different timing on the lights or something like that. I mean, we're talking about this whole thing globally, but it might be we've got 1 or 2 lanes with this huge spike that are blowing the numbers away, and everything else is fluttering along at 6. And so I think, like I said, I tried to look at your charts, and I'm like, anecdotally, these make no sense to me. Huge spikes at 11, a.m. What?
That's your small sample size.
Well,
that's where you're on it. Yeah.
Well, but she said she was there for a week.
Yep.
And so it's like, and it was last week of January was a normal week.
Yep.
Finally, people were able to get around. No,
Yeah.
Susie, do you have a chance to? Can we?
I
Sorry.
just want to wrap it up because
Okay.
I'm going to wrap. So that that's kind of I think rather than try to build the Taj Mahal, maybe we only need to fix the roof.
Point well taken.
And then last meeting I said, well, what about just throwing a roundabout in there? And the answer was basically ODOT doesn't do roundabouts. Well, my answer to that is, why not? If we're going to recommend this weird crossing over traffic-y thing that I have never in 50 years of driving seen anywhere, where I have seen interstate roundabouts.
Yeah.
I
think the correct statement would be ODOT hasn't done roundabouts.
Right.
But boy, if you can have roundabouts, you have the right company.
Yeah. And then the last thing is, I have a solution to the funding problem. It's real simple. Just north of Henry C. Road on both Beaver Creek and 213, ODOT's already going out for toll booths. Boom. And we handle all the incoming traffic. They built a bridge in San Diego in 2 years. They paid it off.
The Oregonian would like to thank you for your subscription.
I do not pay for the Oregon. But anyway, that's my roundabout thing. I think we need to look at what we're trying to fix and not necessarily.
Point well taken. So Susie, maybe you could follow up, or Christine could follow up with you on those strange numbers. We're getting short on time tonight, but obviously there's some legitimate, curiosity there, and Susie may have a quick answer. Please.
Yeah, so that what you do see is different movement, or the profile is different based on the movement, and the profiles that are smoother are the ones that have the highest volume because you're getting the biggest sample size. So the westbound left being one of the lowest volume movements at the intersection has a pretty erratic profile.
Susan, make sure you're speaking into the mic.
Okay, and we did have to look out for things like somebody who stopped at the shopping center and maybe had a 5-minute trip, and then so they could have gotten picked up. So we did have to clean the data a little bit.
So if they went to Sherry's, then they might have actually been in the pickup the whole time or whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. So yes, it's not perfect everywhere, but I think when you look at, you can definitely see which movements are having more trouble and less trouble at different times of the day, and what is going on as a whole. I think it's pretty illustrative. I think it does help highlight that westbound right turn takes a lot of longer in the morning, and that there's other movements that are more critical in the evening. Just speaking to the critical movement, and can we just apply a fix to just the critical movement? I'll speak to that a little bit. We did definitely look at that in the first phase, looking at improvements. That was really how our approach to looking at what can we do to solve a problem. So critical movement is made up of 4 movements. You take, if you look at east and westbound, and you say, which is a higher conflict? These lefts and this through, or these lefts and this through? So which sum is higher? And so in this case, it's the eastbound left and westbound through. Those volumes are more in conflict than the ones doing this, if that makes sense.
So eastbound turning 1 to 213, heading to 205.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in north-south, it is the southbound left and the northbound through. So when you have a critical movement, it's actually made up of 4 movements that are conflicting with each other. It's kind of like the critical path. You have to serve, you're giving a certain amount of green time to all 4 of these movements. And as you restrict, and if you, the green time gets allocated to all those 4, and theoretically the signal's operating in the most efficiently as possible to serve those 4 movements. So when you're adding capacity, I mean, that's really how we came up with the triple left scenario, because of the constraints of the southbound lefts. But that needing to go in tandem with the northbound through, for example. So
Susan,
that's just to answer the question on critical movement, and it's not one movement, it's a combination of 4 movements and how they work together and trying to steal time from each other. And then on the roundabout, we did, ODOT does do roundabouts. Actually, there's a new one being built in Region 4, actually. So roundabouts do have a place on the state highway system, but we looked at this location. The traffic volume on Highway 213 is so high that it was going to need 4 circulating lanes, which that is something that ODOT does not do.
Let's do it.
Think about Paris,
Yeah. ODOT's doing 2 lanes, double circulation lanes, maybe with a right turn bypass, but not 4. It's just because the volume's on 213.
I'm looking for a place to build a catapult.
But if you had a flyover interchange, some of the ramp terminals could be roundabouts. That is true. There's one
Susie
going
and
on
Damon,
in
advisory
Washington.
committee members. I think that it's time to kind of just know that we're in a position of kind of part A of a very long meeting. So to be continued on April 20th. We know that we have 3 things to be looking at critically: the length of time. If we accept a higher level of congestion for a longer time, what is that length of time? This question of where is the volume to capacity failure, we were just going over that pretty quickly, and maybe we could do it next time with a map, so everyone could sort of understand where that is, and if not within the suite of improvements. So there's a suite of lower cost improvements. How do those interact with the greatest failure? And then I think it's clear that some members would be much more comfortable with preserving the right to continue to advocate for a larger, more regional solution, along with accepting a higher level of congestion for some defined period of time. I'm sorry that we can't hear from everybody right before the end, unless Mike, you have like a 15-second.
Yes.
Okay, go.
The other critical movement that is the westbound right. Mm-hmm. That isn't on your list anywhere.
So we'll start with that.
Did I hear you say that the sensors were 1,000 feet away on each side?
Yes, except
then the answer to
North
Damon's question is, if at 35 miles an hour is 40 seconds.
Okay. So Bob,
if you just cruise it from sensor to sensor.
20 seconds or less. Mr.
This is for
Murphy.
ODOT. This is for
Way
ODOT.
after the
What would be
intersection.
wrong-
Right. Sorry. My apologies.
40 seconds to go 2,000
Yeah.
feet at
Yeah.
35 miles.
Yeah.
But you have the width of the intersection too, is what he's saying.
Gentlemen?
So it's 42.
We're going to start with this next time. So please know that this is, again, the second half of this discussion about where the greatest constraints are will be our starting off, one of our starting off points next time.
15 seconds is down to 2 now.
Yep.
I'm watching the clock. Thank you. Please.
This is
Yeah.
for ODOT. What would be wrong, especially for the younger generation, because all I do is that's just it.
It's all right.
Is to computerize all the state's highway system so that you can get on your cell phone and find out
I think it's
what's
Google.
going on at
I think
an
it's called
intersection.
Google.
And you plan your trips accordingly. Because industry does, UPS does.
Yeah, I would love to sidebar with you about that.
All right. Gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much. This is obviously sort of a pregnant conversation. We're at the first part of a long conversation. I think our next meeting is April 20th. If everyone doesn't have that on your calendar, please put it on your calendar. I thank John, Dana, city staff. Any final comments from John or David before we adjourn? Or
Thank
close
you
comments?
very much.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind talking to Renata, Bob, and Damon, because they said some things that I think could help. I'd like a sidebar conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So you've been called after class, ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
commissioners, in the back of the room. Thank you very much. And with that, we're adjourned. Please look for the summary, and we'll see you on April 20th. Thank you so much.
ODOT.